Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Sorry I was gone for a little bit. I was finishing up my album. If you want to check that out, the link will be in the description, but let's just get right into this. We'll start clockwise like we always do. Up north, the main battles are going on in two different places, mostly around the settlement of Sinkivka and Davydiv. The Russians have been pushing up by Sinkivka recently because it's a pretty key settlement in the area. Sinkivka is sort of the gateway into Kupiansk, which is a settlement which is on both sides of the river, which handles most of Ukraine's cross-river transport in the Oskil River area. The Russians' main goal is to push from Sinkivka to this bridge and cut the supplies for the Ukrainians in this area. The Ukrainians have been putting up monstrous defense in this area. This front line has hardly moved in a year, and it seems like every time Russia mounts more pressure, the Ukrainians are ready to defend this area. Seeing how strong they were defending this area, they changed their vector of attack into this area by Davydiv, and they managed to have some success by taking over Kreminna and pushing to the outskirts of Davydiv without being able to actually take the settlement. The Ukrainians also did a small sort of flanking maneuver to make Russian movement in the area more difficult by pushing up to Novoselivske but leaving the settlement itself as a gray zone. This northern area is probably the place that Ukraine has the most on lock at the moment. There's not a lot of good vectors for Russia to attack on because there's a big hill and river right here. The Ukrainians have strong defense by Svatove, and this area is pretty well fortified as well. Now, unfortunately, this is kind of where the good news starts to end because the Russians have been making a lot of progress along the front. The next area I want to talk about is Belarus, and this is a pretty important settlement because if the Russians get control of this settlement, it'll basically give them access to the southern part of this Serbiansky forest. Keeping this forest a back and forth battle is good for Ukraine because the Russians have a big defense line going up from Kreminna to Svatove, and having this big, naturally hard to move through forest helps Ukraine defend this area a little better. The next area Russia made slight gains was in this railroad area. If I turn on the satellite map, you can see that there is a rail line which goes up through here with some tree belts, and their main goal is to try to get a foothold on this high ground. I guess they've that's more like a toehold. Actually, that's more like a toenail hold. But this advance happened back earlier in February, and nothing's come of it since, so it's likely that the Ukrainians have set up defense here. Moving a little further down to Bakhmut, this is an area where the Russians have made a lot of gain. The Russians' two main goals of the spring were one, to take Avdiivka, and two, to push to Chasiv Yar before the spring ends. This has been another big thing that they've been trying to accomplish by pushing towards Chasiv Yar. Dnipro was the main area where a lot of the fighting was taking place earlier, but it slowly shifted south as the Russians got stuck in this area. They had some success pushing past Svatove and moving into a part of Ivandivska. I think I overestimated the gains right here. Looks more like that, I think. But regardless, this is still a pretty big push. The situation by Kolomyichykha is pretty stable. People were worried that the Russians were going to push this way and outflank the settlement, taking over this hill, which would make it hard to hold Kolomyichykha. But so far that hasn't happened, and Ukraine's actually slightly counterattacked in that area. Now the next big area, this is probably the biggest push of the war since the Velika Nova Soka direction in the 2023 counteroffensive, but the Russians managed to take Avdiivka back in February. This settlement had been holding for 10 years and had strong fortifications, but the Russians eventually managed to outflank it and push past. Initially, people were thinking that the Ukrainians may try to stabilize a line around here or so, but what mainly explains the Russian gains between these two lines is that the Ukrainians had already set up their defense line in this area because of the naturally favorable geography. As you can see, there's a big river system which goes through it, which just makes it harder to push past and put vehicles over it, as well as them having high ground behind these settlements. If the Ukrainians aren't able to completely stabilize this front, I think the worst that we'll see is maybe in a month or so the Russians will have pushed up to this line, but I think after given enough time the Ukrainians will stabilize the situation, and I don't think it's going to rapidly move like it did in the past week through here. I could always be wrong because I do not have a degree. I dropped out of school to become a rapper. The next area where the Russians have been pushing is by this Mariinka region. The main settlement that they're trying to attack is Novomikhailivka. Novomikhailivka is important because it's been holding for about 2 years or so. The main base for the Ukrainians in this area is Kurahove, and Novomikhailivka is the main thorn which is stopping them from getting there. What the Russians are hoping they'll do is outflank them by going through Pobizhzhia and from the south as well, and slowly work their way up this line. Many, even pro-Ukrainian sources, are probably saying that Novomikhailivka will be lost in the next week or so, but the Ukrainians do actually have defense lines set up in the next settlements. We'll see how effective those are able to hold, and hopefully they can prevent a push up to here. The good thing is there is this just horrendous geography right along this whole area with a big industrial center, which is going to be a massive block to any further advance in this area. This is largely the reason why the Russians haven't tried to push out from Nivel Belske into this area. The Ukrainians have an artificial hill which is similar to the one by Vuhledar, and they were able to use these to stop any Russian advances in the area for a while. If you guys could comment to let me know exactly what this is. It looks similar to the Terrakom fortification north of Avdiivka. It's not telling me what it is. Oh, it's called Terrakom. Waste heap. Okay, yeah. It's a waste heap, but the Ukrainians use that in Avdiivka, so they can use this one too. The next area that we're going to talk about is down by Roboltine. The Russians managed to grab some gains west of the settlement, and they actually managed to take over the middle part of the settlement as well. But the Ukrainians did a counterattack on the 28th and were able to take it back. Overall, this isn't an area where I expected the Russians to attack from, but I guess they decided to. But that's all I've mostly got. These are the major updates that have happened in the past month or so. Thought I'd just come in and drop a little update. I'll try to post a little more frequently. But yeah, the part of the main reason I was gone for like the first sixth of this year was because I've been working on this album. I put a lot of effort into it, and I think this is my best work. So if you want to check that out, that's in the description too. And that's all I've got. I'll see you all later.